Yes, he did. Donnybrook is made possible by the support of the Betsy and Thomas Patterson Foundation and the members of 9PBS.
Well, thanks for joining us for this edition of Donnybrook. Great to have you with us. And on Next Up, we're going to talk to Farrin Manian, who's a professor of infectious disease. He's a physician at Mercy Hospital. In fact, the chair of medicine there. He'll be answering questions today from Ray and Wendy. Let's meet our panelists. There she is, the news director for the Big 550, KTRS, Wendy Wiese, also co-host of the Jennifer and Wendy Show. Mr. Bill McClellan, one of our founders of the program back in 1987 with us, along with his fellow founder from rawstory.com, the Big 550, and the Riverfront Times, Mr. Ray Hartmann. And from the St. Louis American, he's Alvin Reid. Well, I do want to say this is a special date in American history because it was on this day 100 years ago that our founder, Martin Dugan, was born. June 3rd, 1921. Want to thank his daughter, Mary, for reminding us about that. But boy, Bill and Ray, you started this program with him back in 1987. Who would have thought that this program, Donnybrook, would still be on PBS in St. Louis?
Not I.
And nor I, but we sure. It's great. I'm glad she passed that on because we still miss him. But that's nice.
For sure. I'm sorry.
I was going to say I thought of Martin when I was in Texas recently, because he was there at St. Mary on December 7th, 1941, and somebody ran into his room and said, "The Japanese just bombed Pearl," and Martin thought they meant the Pearl Brewery. And he thought, what a strange place for the Japanese to bomb, but this means war.
He was proud that he defended Lake Michigan, I guess.
Yes.
Yeah, Japanese.
Well,
but
got the word also that his grandson, Thomas, will be starting journalism school at the University of Missouri in the fall. So how about that? The journalism tradition will continue.
Wow.
Okay.
Wow.
Wendy, we're going to start the program off with you. The mayor of St. Louis, Tashara Jones, has announced that at least a committee that's making recommendations to her for how to spend some of that $517 million federal dollars coming our way. Of course, she has to get this through the Board of Estimate, Apportionment, the Board of Aldermen. But there is some discussion that 10,000 in St. Louis will receive checks of between $350 and $500 to somewhat mitigate the pain for those who were supposed to get these federal unemployment checks but have been stopped by the state. There was a $300 match. That's going to be discontinued. Missouri's one of 24 states to cut that off. Well, what do you think about this cash bonus to some St. Louisans?
Well, on the city's website, when Mayor Jones visited with us several weeks ago, she was talking about the fact that she was looking for input from St. Louis City residents on what to do with this windfall from the government. And I'm sure that has probably been mentioned. I think the only thing that would be difficult would be to determine which of the 10,000 and why only 10,000. But this is her prerogative. That's the kind of thing that was her platform, easing pain, reparations of some sort for the people who really have been in financially difficult circumstances. So I say good for her. And I just think it would be very, very challenging to decide who and how much.
Well, if you took the number of people estimated 10,000, and let's say they all got 500, so now we're at $5 million, and it would probably be less than that. And if it was $1 million less, that's $4 million, which is the exact amount of money kind of being relocated from the police department. Tashara has been great at making deals so far in regard to economic development. I think you say hey, 4 goes to the people and 4 goes back to the police department, and that would be my advice, because it just, the individual amounts of money don't bother me at all. I think it's a good thing. But then when you think $5 million, could that in a mass go to something, like fixing the locks at the jail or something like that? And I know other money is coming in, but I'm really torn. I really am torn on that one.
Well, that's an interesting point because Kara Spencer, who, of course, ran against Mayor Jones this past spring but didn't prevail, tweeted today that she's concerned that inmates already are being moved from the workhouse to the City Justice Center, even though the locks haven't been fixed yet. I thought that was an interesting tweet. But I would say, okay, is it not possible with all the litter that's on the highways to kind of hire some people for $300 or $500 to pick up some of the litter, or for that matter, because you don't know how people are going to spend it. Most people will spend it responsibly, but there are going to be some people who will spend it on drugs or guns. Why not have it for, a daycare voucher or a housing voucher or a food voucher? Cash kind of concerns me.
Well, and then what's to say that with the next infusion, are you going to have to, there would be pressure to repeat the largesse, I think, again, wouldn't there?
No, there might, but that's where you have to stand up to that, though. I mean, okay, it's a one time. It really is a one time.
And I like the idea of it being targeted, like to the people who were getting unemployment, and now the feds are stopping that. When the national government was just giving everybody like $1,200 or whatever it was, right. I thought, well, that some people need it more than others, and this targeting to people who really need it, that makes a lot of sense to me.
It does. And also there is, first of all, it is clearly a political statement. There's no question about it, but it's her politics. It's sort of a poke in the eye to the Parsons of the world. And by the way, Mike Parsons is not the only one. This has sort of become one more partisan argument nationally. Most of the red states are cutting it off and the blue states aren't. But there's a stimulative effect legitimately. You mentioned guns and drugs. The gun part is probably the one part that the Republicans would be cool with if people were saying that. But well, the people who are of relatively modest means are probably more likely, according to every study done, to spend money around themselves just out of necessity and for necessities. And that has a stimulative effect on the economy much more, as Bill was saying. You just throw money out to everybody. This is
real quick.
Not a bad way to stimulate.
But you don't know that the money's going to be spent in St. Louis. That's why I suggest, how about a gift card or something for a company that's in St. Louis?
But real quick, is Kara Spencer now the shadow mayor? Because that was your phrase.
I don't think.
She could make an effort at it, but it takes more than one tweet.
Okay,
it's a legitimate point. It's a legitimate point.
The challenge.
Hey, how about this, Wendy Wiese? This week, the Twitterverse went crazy, in my view, against Ellie Kemper, who is the Queen of Love and Beauty at the 1999 Veiled Prophet Ball. Miss Kemper, of course, a great actress from The Office and beyond. People associate her with the KKK because the garb of the Veiled Prophet looks similar to the garb of people with the Ku Klux Klan, which makes no sense. But there you have it, the Twitterverse, and she was smeared. What do you think about this?
Well, I was struck by a Facebook post by our friend and colleague, longtime anchor and reporter Don Johnson yesterday, because Don always shoots very straight from the hip, and he thought that to suggest some kind of connection between Ellie Kemper and the KKK was absurd. He said, obviously, it was a racist organization. It was keeping Black people out. It was about keeping Jews out, all people of color. But that since the 1970s, they have made an effort. They extended an invitation to Don himself. They have extended invitations to many people of color in an effort to be more diverse. And it just, I just agreed with him. And because yes, every organization was racist at one time or another in this country. But to blame Ellie Kemper, a young woman he just thought that that was unfair. And I agree with him.
Okay. I just, look, if anybody, anywhere catches some grief or because they had anything to do with the veiled prophet, I'm sorry. I don't feel sorry for them. I'm not saying they're racist. I'm not saying they're in the Klan. But let's get real here. She was the queen in 1999, and you got some guy parading around in a hooded mask and all white and it's all secret. And I don't care how many, black people got invited or their daughters could hopefully be the veiled prophet queen. It is so antebellum that it needs to go. It needs to stop. And I am not personally attacking anybody that has anything to do with it, other than they really need to ask themselves, seriously, in 2021, we're still doing this. So yeah, if she caught grief, that's because she was the queen and she may have enjoyed it. It may have launched her career, but people of color, people who are white, people across the world who probably have never heard of it would have a problem with this whole veiled prophet thing.
Well, it's a debutante ball, and major cities have them. There was a great movie about them in New York City around 1990. It was called Metropolitan. I think it was directed by Whit Stillman.
Do they wear a costume, Charlie?
Well,
is it a secret?
At Carnival, they wear costumes. Hollywood, Halloween, we wear costumes. It's weird, I admit. But the thing is, it's not just blacks and Jews who weren't allowed to join. You had to have a lot of money. It was for the captains of industry. There's a lot of people who were not invited, who were from all backgrounds, who could not join that.
So that makes it okay?
No, I'm just saying.
If you had several million, you get invited. But if you had several 100,000, you wouldn't. So that means Jews, black people, y'all completely out.
I have no problems with the rich hanging among themselves. If the rich want to do that, they want to have their ball. Who am I to say that they should invite me? I
don't want to get invited. If they invited me, I would never, ever go. I mean, you talk about burning your draft card. Yeah, you see that on the Twitter.
Alvin, I disagree with Alvin on this one, and I understand your concern. Obviously, it was very involved back in the 80s, talking about how I didn't think that St. Louis's big signature event on the riverfront should be called the VP anything, and it was the VP Fair. And I understand. I don't disagree with what Alvin's saying about its heritage, but I think that on a number of levels, first of all, if we're going to hold Ellie Kemper to that standard, we've got to have similar disdain for people named Danforth and Snook and God knows who else.
When it comes to the veiled prophet, I do. These are all good people, and these are all great families. But if you're going to sign off on the veiled prophet, I have a problem with that. I will always have a problem with that, and nothing can be said that would change my mind. I'm not calling people racist, but I'm calling them wrong when it comes to this veiled prophet thing.
I'm not suggesting you call anybody anything. I'm saying that I don't think that 20-some years later, after she was part of this as a kid, that Ellie Kemper should be answering for it. And I have to say, this kind of story, unfortunately, makes it harder to me to get racial justice because we're constantly dealing with symbols and what some people call political correctness. I would argue that the whole cancel culture is as much on the right as is the left. But my point is, I just don't think it's helpful, and I just don't think she should be subjected to it. I don't disagree with, and I'm not suggesting anybody shouldn't have a right to.
What I think more weird than the mask, which is but people wear costumes. What people do, what they do. I thought it was weird because I'm not from St. Louis that they televised it, and that kids would sit around and. I guess in the 50s and 60s, and kids like other kids who were not elite would sit at home and watch the girls who had money. Now that's kind of rubbing it in your face.
And let's don't even look at it from a sexist standpoint. One of the many people who have been interviewed on this is like, it was like a parade for virginal potential wives. It's a pretty antiquated idea in the minds of many people. And I don't know if it will stand up in the 2020 post-woke culture.
And
And
yet
I
the
think one
Catholic
thing I
Church
wanna
has its
say
own
is-
version of it, right? Isn't the
Yes,
fleur-de-lis
the
ball?
fleur-de-lis.
Yeah,
the
right.
fleur-de-lis ball.
Okay,
And
let's
I
move
think
on
that it
because of
should-
time.
it should be taught more than it is the history of this. You talk about education, what we teach and what we don't teach. The fact that we have literally whitewashed this is not cool. And
Well, but it's not
isolated.
associated with the KKK. That's clear. And the Twitterverse said that it was.
I think people should know more about our history in this respect. And quite honestly, this isn't a great part of it.
Okay, Alvin Reid, what about, speaking of parts of our history that are not that great, we just closed the FEMA site, which was administering for 8 weeks vaccinations in downtown St. Louis at the Americas Center. And really, the results were woeful because we expected 3,000 a day. Instead, we inoculated 800 a day, 25% or so. And the city of St. Louis, here we are, all these weeks after we've had the vaccine, just 29% of St. Louisans are fully vaccinated. It's not much better in the county. It's 36% there. I don't get it. The lines weren't long. It was very well organized. Why do you think this area is just not getting vaccinated?
Well, St. Louis first in STDs, last in getting a vaccination, that could save your life. I don't have an answer. I will say that the site opened up, at the Dome, just literally within 10 days or maybe even fewer days, that you could now make appointments and go to like your neighborhood pharmacy. So I think that took away the demand that would have been there at the Dome. But with that being said, 30% is not good enough. And then the city's level is just absolutely ridiculous. And there's so much education that you can put out there. There's so much knowledge you could try to give to people, but there's just no excuse for it. That's sad.
I think that there is an explanation. I agree. It's no excuse. Certainly, there are many people as you know, Alvin, the Black community has some issues with what happened to Black people back about the time when the VP Fair was at its height. But that's pretty clear, that experience. And there's the fact that let's not forget that we've got the Fox Newses of the world hammering away at a substantial part of the population, telling them that their freedom is being denied and that this is a plot. And that isn't to be underestimated. We can't forget that there's.
But the percentage is higher in St. Charles. The
What's
percentage is higher in St. Charles, 37%
Yeah,
in St. Charles.
that still doesn't mean that there aren't people affected by that.
Yeah.
And in the
well, okay. I hear you, Ray, but I don't think of the city population that has not been vaccinated. Okay, of that 27% that have been vaccinated, I would guess that the overwhelming majority of those are white St. Louisans. So thus, why, the whole idea with Black people not being vaccinated, and you could go back to Tuskegee and you go back to a lot of other things, that literally most young people have no idea what a Tuskegee syphilis study was. So there's something missing, and I don't know what it is.
Well, I think part of it is like for the polio or Spanish flu, where it struck young people, and you could look around and see people you knew getting hit by it. This were like, it devastated the population in a lot of retirement homes. But if you're just a young guy out on the street, you don't know anybody who's getting sick. And so there wasn't an urgency to go out and protect yourself. And it seemed like a lot of hype.
Well, let me ask you this, Bill.
Another thing is, even though the Tuskegee Airmen were African American, the generations of white Americans and Hispanic Americans who have grown up hearing about that are not exactly bathed in relief. If the government can do it to one segment of the population, then the government can do it to any segment of the population. I think that mindset still exists today.
But I'm just going to correct you real quick because you didn't mean to say it, Wendy, but the Tuskegee Airmen were the pilots that flew in World War II.
What did I say?
You said the Tuskegee Airmen. But no.
I'm not sure I'm buying that. I agree with you, Alvin, but I mean,
I thought that's what
Minority
I thought you said.
communities
I
are-
said Tuskegee
Minority
Airmen.
communities are not eschewing the measles, the rubella, and the mumps vaccines, so I don't get it, or the polio.
Because
or
they've
the
been around
smallpox.
because they've been around for decades.
Yeah,
Yeah.
parents and grandparents are old enough to remember that people actually got polio. Also, you had to have those shots to go to school. So if the second they say you have to have a vaccination to come to school next fall, guess how many people are going to start getting vaccinated?
Okay, well, maybe Bill McClellan, there's a better incentive because Governor J.B. Pritzker in Illinois is going to sign legislation which will allow bars to give everybody a free beer if they can show proof of vaccination. So you take that vaccination card to 30 bars, I guess you get 30 free beers. It's kind of sad that we haven't incentivize people with beer to get them a life-saving cure, but AB is going to do that too. Anheuser-Busch has announced that it's going to give free beer to every American if 70% of us are vaccinated by the 1st of July. What do you think, Bill?
Well, I'll go in and get my free beer, but it's all kind of silly, really, that you have to do something like this, and I don't think it's going to really incentivize anybody to try to make that 70% so that other people can get free beers. This is the sort of thing, if you worried about COVID, you go and get a vaccination, like we all did. But if you're not worried, you don't care. So I think it's very nice of AB, and I applaud him. But I don't think it means anything.
Well, one way to do it is to make it cool. If you make things cool, then people want to do it. And with that being said, cold beer here. Cold beer here. I like the 30 beer theory, Charlie.
But what I'm trying to figure out is how well grounded is that hesitation if you're going to go ahead and somebody offers you one free beer, you're going to go ahead and get something that you thought was so dangerous. If your fear can be bought for a beer, then whatever works.
And in the state of Ohio, pretty much every day they're announcing $1 million lottery.
Yes.
From the vaccine lottery.
Whatever works.
That seems to be. I kind of think I think it's kind of, at this point, I'm with Bill. It's certainly not going to necessarily. I guess I shouldn't say move the needle if it's vaccine, but I think that it's fun.
Okay. Ray, let me ask you this.
Harm.
It was announced by the Post-Dispatch's, I think, Joel Courier, and I hadn't seen this until you pointed it out prior to the program, that Jerry Carmody, the special prosecutor, who is supposed to be prosecuting Donald Tisby, the special investigator for Circuit Attorney Kim Gardner when she was prosecuting the governor, Eric Greitens. Well, to make a long story short, Carmody is pulling out because the trial, we understand, has been delayed so much. He's got other things to say or other things to do, other things on his agenda. What do you make of this?
Well, only in St. Louis wouldn't this be a big story. This is a big case. Whatever you think of Kim Gardner, Tisby, this was a big case. It was a big deal when Jerry Carmody, who's really not by nature a criminal prosecutor type, was brought in, was much fanfare. He was going to do the special prosecution. And Joel Courier doesn't have anything to do with this, but the fact is that the Post-Dispatch had it up on its website for about 10 minutes. It played it at I think it was today and buried in page 7 somewhere. And this is a big deal, whatever you think about it, that the special prosecutor in this huge high-profile case, which, by the way, is the basis for an effort to disbar our circuit attorney here. And it's like nobody cares. And then there's going to be another element come out. In fact, I'm working on it. I don't know if anybody else has, which is that Jermaine Wooten, who represents Mr. Tisby, has filed a motion to to sanction Jerry Carmody. That's really irony there.
Okay. Let me explain a couple things here, Ray. First of all, criticizing the Post-Dispatch for this should be a big story. When did Mr. Carmody file his motion to get out? On Friday afternoon before Memorial Day. I mean, this is an effort by him to keep it quiet. Joel Courier, bless his heart, found out and had a story in. And who are we supposed to go to? Kim Gardner, of course, won't talk to us. Mr. Carmody just gave a short statement and let that ride. Tisby's lawyer won't talk to us. And as far as why this is happening, I have a pretty good guess. You know, as I've said before, Kim Gardner is like Donald Trump. I mean, her people are fierce and furious. And if I'm Mr. Carmody, you know, his firm has two of his children, you know, adult children working on this case. And they're all of a sudden being put in this position where, you know, you are part of the racist establishment out to get Kim Gardner. And if I'm Carmody, I don't want my kids to go through with that. So I'm saying, and just like you say, Wooten's already filed a motion to censor them and to sanction them. And going after Kim Gardner, even when you write about Kim Gardner, her fans are fierce about this. And I'm not surprised that Carmody doesn't want anything to do with it.
Well, excuse me, Bill, but every part of that, first of all, there's been no evidence of any kind of threats or anything like that.
Any evidence of what?
No evidence that anybody is going after Mr.
You
Carmody.
just said your own movement.
No, he's not right. He's the attorney, and he's he's accusing Carmody of doing the stuff that Carmody and all these guys accuse Gardner of. But my point is, all of the factors that you talked about with Kim Gardner were in place when he affirmatively went after this position. So it's not like some new development there. He knew who he was going after.
He was named special prosecutor on this.
He wanted the job.
That is a position, be special prosecutor against Kim Gardner when her defense is the racist establishment is out to get me. That's not a good position to be in.
When he campaigned for this job, he didn't get drafted.
What do you mean campaign for it?
He did. He worked to get the job.
I will say, we only have 30 seconds to go, but it is possible. It's been delayed so much. I mean, because of COVID, the courts
I agree.
Put all the keys in the back.
I think there's other possibilities.
It's still delayed.
What's his name? Curry did fine, but he's got nothing to do with the fact that it should have been on 1A and it wasn't.
Oh, Ray, all you can do when something is filed Friday morning on Friday afternoon on Memorial Day weekend is you get it and you try to make as much as you can. But when people won't talk to you, what are you supposed to do?
Okay, thanks everybody. Sure appreciate it. Hey, that's it for the first half. On Next Up, which is just moments away, Ray and Wendy will talk to Dr. Farrin Manian from Mercy Hospital, taking their questions about infectious disease. That and more next on Next Up.
Donnybrook is made possible by the support of the Betsy and Thomas Patterson Foundation and the members of 9PBS.
Welcome back. This is Donnybrook Next Up. I'm Wendy Wiese with my colleague Ray Hartmann, and we are so delighted to welcome to the program Dr. Farrin Manian. He is an infectious disease physician and the chairman of the Department of Medicine at Mercy Hospital. Thank you so much for being here, Doctor.
Thank you for having me.
There is a great deal of interest as we move away, or at least semi out of the pandemic's clutches. There's a great deal of interest in the information that is coming to light about the so-called long haulers. We're seeing alarming symptoms from people really of all ages, mainly people maybe in their 30s and 40s and perhaps 50s who still have a lot of life ahead. What can you tell us about these long haulers and what they're in for?
Yeah, so, initially when COVID was recognized, I think everybody thought it was going to be what we'll call an acute infection that you get sick from, and then it kind of goes away and you're done, hopefully with a good recovery. But as more and more people have gotten sick, we become really more aware of the fact that some people, depending on the study and how you actually define it, it could be as high as, 75% of people after 6 months may actually have some symptoms that are lingering after the acute phase of the infection is gone. So these people are not requiring hospitalization anymore. They're not, having high fevers or even necessarily having respiratory symptoms, but they just continue having fatigue, headaches, abdominal pain, muscle aches. And these are things that they did not have before the COVID actually hit them. So it's a longer lasting set of symptoms, and some people actually call it post-acute. Post-acute means that after the acute infection is gone, these are kind of the after effect symptoms that seem to linger on much longer than just a couple of weeks.
And what are some of those symptoms? I mean, you mentioned the respiratory, the intestinal, but I read somewhere where one of the patients described it as she literally could not get out of bed. That you talk about the fatigue. How does it differ from, say, a chronic fatigue syndrome type illness?
Yeah, so it has a lot of features that are associated that we often associate with chronic fatigue, and sometimes even like fibromyalgias, which is just kind of a chronic muscle and joint pains. And fatigue is a very common part of this syndrome. But on the other hand, there are other things. For example, loss of sense of smell, which is relatively unique to COVID, and that can go on for a couple of months before you regain that. There are also a lot of people who have, abdominal pains. Some people actually still have this cough that just goes on longer than just a couple of weeks. So it has features that are somewhat common with the chronic fatigue, but it also has features that are unusual in our typical patient population that has chronic fatigue syndrome. And to be honest, I think we're all really learning right now, trying to, number one, define it so that we can study it better, and then really characterize it in a way that we can figure out what is the best treatment for it. So we're still in our infancy in really understanding this syndrome.
Doctor, it's certainly great. The humility of that we're all learning now is impressive, but at the same time, probably gives people a little bit of a chill that we don't know. Do we have any sense for what proportion of the population of people who have had COVID might be unfortunate candidates for the long haul effects?
Yeah, so many of these patients are kind of younger population who really were healthy before COVID. Depending on the study, there was one study, for example, from China that they actually reported that 75% or 76% of people had at least one symptom after 6 months. There was another study that came out of the US in hospitalized patients. About a third of people still had some symptoms after 60 days. There's also a similar study that people that never got hospitalized, and they actually have symptoms still, maybe about a third of them have symptoms after a couple of weeks. So, but I think the thing that is really important, and the thing that actually kind of surprised me with this disease, is that there are a lot of people who actually had mild COVID disease that never actually required hospitalization that have wound up with this syndrome. At least in my experience, when I have identified people who have chronic kind of a fatigue or illness associated with an acute infection, most of those acute infections have been on the severe side, but there's a significant number of people with COVID who really didn't have severe enough disease to require hospitalization. We're also getting this. So I think it's a very interesting development with this disease.
And if I could follow up on that point, I have a friend who's fits exactly what you described. She had fairly mild symptoms. She had COVID, did everything right, and never had anything near hospitalization. And she has ongoing fatigue that's kind of unpredictable. And the unpredictability of it is perhaps the worst part of it, that wants to know, is this going to be forever? Is it good? What do you say to somebody? I mean, because as you say, candidly, as well as no profession's ever shined better than the medical profession in this nightmare, but we don't know what's going on. What do you say to somebody about how likely it is that this is going to be just around for a little while or whatever?
Yeah, right. I think it's a great question. Again, a dose of humility is a really good thing to present at the very beginning. Knowing that somebody has had an acute infection and they didn't have this problem before, and now they have it, gives me more hope that this is going to go away. And the reason I say that is, if these symptoms were present, in any form or fashion before COVID, then I would be less sanguine about them going away as the illness, as you get further and further out from COVID. A lot of the symptoms, like for example, loss of smell, that are kind of more specific to COVID, do actually go away, after a few months. So there is healing there too. And certainly my experience that people I've seen in the hospital, as well as some even friends that I've had who had it, 2 or 3 months, they really do get better often. Now, whether all the symptoms go away or not, and fatigue has always been one of the major problems, and it does fluctuate. And at least in my experience, when I took care of a lot of patients with chronic fatigue, it was pretty amazing. There were days where people couldn't get out of bed, and then there were days where you just felt like, wow, I think I got a lot of energy today. I'm going to go do some gardening, or I'm going to go jogging. And then boom, they got sick again. They felt really weak again. And so what I tell people is be patient. To be patient. I know that we all want to be 100% yesterday. And I get it. I'm the same way. I want to be well. I don't want to be sick. On the other hand, I think recognizing that you need to have patience with this, to have a more gradual exercise program, make sure you're getting enough sleep, because that's one thing that I think I probably need to emphasize, is that many people with this syndrome actually have a sleep disorder. They just can't get enough sleep, have a refreshing sleep. And, I ask them to try to get as much, kind of a quality sleep as possible, a kind of graded exercise program, make sure your nutrition is taken care of, keep the level of stress to the minimum. And, when you do these things from different angles, I really feel very hopeful that gradually, not overnight, but gradually these symptoms, at least in most people, will go away.
Are you recommending anything, Dr. Manian, from an over-the-counter standpoint? Nothing. Is there anything that seems to be working to alleviate a little bit of these symptoms?
Yeah, there's absolutely no specific medication. Unfortunately, again, I wish there were, but I think right now we need to go by the science. And right now there are a lot of studies going on across the country to try to figure out what are some specific medications that might actually be helpful for any of these symptoms. But certainly, over-the-counter medications, if you have a headache, sure, you can take something for headache. But in terms of specifically addressing the fatigue part, or specifically, addressing some of the other generalized, brain fog that people have, cognitive problems they have, unfortunately, it's almost at this time, I think all of these things need to kind of heal internally, whether it's sleep, nutrition, gradual exercise. Right now, we do not have a specific medication for these things.
Dr. Fauci has mentioned a mental health, a post-COVID mental health pandemic. What can you tell our Donnybrook viewers about that? What is he talking about?
I suspect that if he's talking about the COVID, illness itself, people do get quite depressed. I think a chronic fatigue illness can be quite depressing. The depression itself can also lead to more symptoms, and you get in this kind of vicious cycle. Some people have difficulty with anxiety after having, COVID, which they didn't have before. So there may be some, some kind of a direct or indirect result from the COVID itself that can have an impact on our mental health. On the other hand, honestly, there may be a broader pandemic only because of fear of getting this disease, fear of getting it when if a relative or family member got sick, or God forbid, if we lost a family member. I think the anxiety is going to be there long after the acute illness pandemic is gone. I think people are always going to worry about, is this going to come back? How am I going to deal with it? The disruption that this pandemic caused, I think, is going to be the trauma from that is going to be with us for a while. So yeah, I think there will be some mental health ramifications to this pandemic for a while.
Dr. Manian, as a segue, what about your own profession and depression or that? Because, and again, at the risk of being patronizing, we always talk about thank you for your service. I always want to say that to somebody who was a frontline worker in this, what was really, you were all turned into kind of a giant mass unit or whatever you want to call it. And it certainly, with a profession already had certain burnout in certain parts of it. What's the future look like for your profession in terms of the impact that this nightmare has had on?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and again, that's probably work in progress for us, because I think right now we're still dealing with the pandemic. I mean, it certainly is not gone yet. We're still seeing patients come in the hospital. I think we're seeing definitely a lot less deaths than before. That has really gone down considerably. Number of hospitalizations gone down. Certainly when when there were thousands of people that were coming in the hospital each day in different cities, and emergency rooms were full. You had to make quick decisions about where would this patient be best treated, in the ICU or elsewhere. Nurses, just fatigue that comes with seeing patients, mental as well as physical fatigue, day in, day out, especially when we couldn't really do much for them until we got some more effective drugs. All those things are a real problem. The burnout among professionals was there before the pandemic, and now I think it just added to that. So I think you're right. I think that there will be again, just like a general population, I think there will be lingering effect of this pandemic. On the professionals who are already trained, and also on the professionals who are in training. Because we're talking about medical students, we're talking about residents, and they're just starting to really get into how to take care of patients, and there was a huge disruption in that as well. So yeah, I think we're going to be dealing with the ramifications of this pandemic, not only on the mental health of general population, but also professionals.
Is there an effort within the profession to encourage more young people now because of what you just described? Despite that, there's also the other side of that coin is there's more opportunity, I would guess, for positions and so forth. Is there some kind of effort being made to encourage more young people to get into medicine or get into, whether it's to become a doctor, nurse, technician, whatever?
I think it was interesting because I'm in infectious diseases, and I have to see what the impact will be on, first of all, people who want to devote their lives to infectious diseases. And I don't know the answer to that yet. I have to see what happens to like fellowships and training programs. So there's a lot more applicants, less applicants. On the other hand, I know that right after the pandemic was recognized early in 2020, there were reports of there was just an increasing number of people who applicants to medical schools because there just seemed to be this kind of a need to care for people, and there was a shortage of of physicians, obviously, especially frontline physicians. And so that was actually very popular. There was an uptick in number of applicants, at least when I saw the reports early in 2020. I don't know if that's necessarily going to continue, to be honest. I think we'll have to see, but I hope that it does. I think that we had a shortage of physicians before pandemic, and I hope that this pandemic doesn't turn people away from this what I consider a wonderful profession.
If you're just joining us on Donnybrook Next Up, Dr. Farrin Manian of Mercy. He is the chairman of the Department of Medicine and an infectious disease expert. And we're talking obviously about the post-COVID world, or hopefully we are moving our way toward a post-COVID world. As a scientist, doctor, because we are not scientists, is there something, and I want to make sure I use the right word, I would think it would be exhilarating to be confronted with this kind of challenge. Obviously, you never want loss of life. Obviously, you never want people in ICUs and in need of ventilators. But at the same time, to be a part of this moment in medical history, I would think would be rewarding in some way.
No, I agree. I think the part of being a scientist is the kind of the spirit of curiosity, and how do I advance science? And I can tell you that there were plenty of things to work on, even infectious disease before COVID. But when COVID hit, I think that from a very scientific standpoint, there were just like thousands of problems that just said we need to be solved, and you didn't even have to think about too hard about what you're going to do. If you're already a scientist, you could just pick anything, and there would be no answer to that. And so you could be the first to try to answer it and really help people. And there's a reason we went to medicine. We all went to medicine so that we can really help others. I mean, that's the core of who we are. And now we were given with all these opportunities, whether it has to do with post-COVID, pre-COVID, or having COVID, all those opportunities all of a sudden were like presented to us. So yes, it was very disruptive. It was very, I think, anxiety filled in many ways, because we also have to go home and we have families. But on the other hand, it really presented with so many opportunities. And I think from just a purely a scientific standpoint, there was a lot of excitement. It says, I can actually do something. And the other thing that excited, I think, most people is that there was no shortage of patients. You could actually do studies that, would ordinarily take, several years to do. And now you have, literally your hospital may have 400 patients at any given time. So you don't have to wait several years. You could literally within 2 months have enough patients, have, a drug that you think is going to work, do the right studies, and then get the answer. I mean, that was just literally unheard of before. So everything was on fast track, which is wonderful, because we had the resources in many instances, and we had the patients that were, wonderful enough and gracious enough to sign up with these various studies. And, I don't think it's pure coincidence that we're able to get the answers as quickly as we did. Vaccination, same way. It's like we had tons of people that volunteered for vaccination. We didn't really have to, twist a lot of people's arms. And we had enough people that we got our answers relatively quickly. So it's just you're right. I mean, this is every 100-year pandemic, and as disruptive as anxiety filled that it was, I think it also provided us with a lot of opportunities for the scientists to collaborate and get all the forces together and then come up with reasonable answers that actually makes a difference in both treatment as well as prevention of this disease.
Dr. Manian, is it every 100-year pandemic? I mean, is it, as someone who studies and understands infectious diseases,
Yeah, I think that, so I have to tell you that 25, 30 years ago when I was doing full-time infectious disease, I always asked my older patients who lived through 1918 influenza pandemic what it was like, because I knew that I was never going to see a pandemic to that magnitude, because it was the pandemic of century, 1918. And here we are. I mean, it was over 100 years later. I mean, there were pandemics of different sizes, but certainly nothing like this. So I think the magnitude, the extent, and the level of disruption that it caused certainly it's not matched by anything else we've seen in our lifetime.
along those lines of unexpected things, I'm going to guess that when you went into this noble specialty of infectious diseases, you weren't like minoring in political science. And yet the politics of this, regardless of what side you might be on, have been really very much a part of this story.
Right.
Talk about that.
Right. I have to admit, I became more aware of the politics even before the COVID pandemic, and it had to do with vaccinations. Literally a few years ago, I just kind of pulled my hair. I said, I never thought I'd have to explain why vaccination immunization is so important. And this was before the pandemic. And I talked to experts who have done more research in this than I have. And we didn't have an answer. We didn't really have an answer why people, despite the science, were so hesitant. And then this pandemic hit, and then all of a sudden, like you said, it became really politicized, and so it almost seems like science doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter what we do to try to really get to the truth. Opinions sometimes matter more, which is not right. And I think that the pandemic really kind of brought out the divide that exists in our country. I think, unfortunately, I don't think science should ever be politicized. I don't think CDC should ever be politicized. I think those are completely different categories in our society and need to stay separate from each other if we want to do the right thing for the masses of people.
I think a lot of people agree with that, Doctor, that to have the medical personnel in those early days of the pandemic reporting in a press conference type atmosphere instead of being separate at a separate facility like the CDC, that might have cured a lot of the problems that we've seen. Do you believe that this, from what you know at this point, do you believe that this was a lab accident in Wuhan? Do you believe it originated in the wet markets? And I know that is, if you can answer that, we've got a big headline for tomorrow.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, because I'm just wondering, when we had there were other these kind of coronaviruses that got into the population. And I think, as you recall, there was a Sars virus that hit the population early in 2000, and again originated in Southeast Asia, and it was thought to be related to bats through these civet cats, and then humans. And then there was like a MERS virus, which is like Middle Eastern coronavirus, that again, bats, and then camels, and then humans. Nobody ever raised the question of, is this a lab accident? At least to my knowledge, we just said that makes sense. Bats may be carrying, they're mammals, and they carry a lot of viruses. They're very similar to coronaviruses, and there are millions of them, so they can potentially have mutations, viruses, and then they can potentially have contact with these animals, and then we have contact with these animals, so we get it because we're mammals as well. That never really, that question of lab accident was never raised during these two other coronaviruses, which I think is kind of fascinating. But this one, I think it's being raised. And I have no idea, right now, I don't know what the premise for that is. I'm just not having all that information with me.
And sadly, doctor, we have to end it there. I'm sure that we will invite you back to appear on Next Up. But Dr. Farrin Manian, infectious disease specialist and the chairman of the Department of Medicine at Mercy, on behalf of all of us at Donnybrook and Donnybrook Next Up, we thank you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the time.
Thank you all for watching. On behalf of Ray Hartmann and our Donnybrook colleagues, keep it right here on 9 PBS. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you.
Donnybrook is made possible by the support of the Betsy and Thomas Patterson Foundation and the members of 9 PBS.